After releasing my 5th edition classes ranking video, I realized something I should have done, and not only with that particular video, it would have been helpful to include specifically how I rate the attributes of any given monster or class. My earlier tier videos were slightly rougher as I was still getting things worked out, but by now I do use specific guidelines on how I grade the entries, which I'll show you now, and I'll give you a couple of examples of each one. You can also use these criteria if you're also interested in rating and debating such things with your own friends. Please bear in mind that none of this is an exact science, and personal preferences are always going to factor in to some degree. First up is mechanics. This has everything to do with the abilities that a creature or a character possesses. These can be attacks, special features, spells, and just about anything you would find in the stat block. What I'm measuring here is not exactly how powerful something is, but more overall how interesting and fun the mechanics are to use. I mean, sheer power is part of it, but that's not everything. Of course, if something is underpowered, it's also not good, and it's annoying or it'll just get neglected. But the opposite is also problematic. Imagine a monster or a character that does nothing but deal 200 damage every turn. Sure, that's really strong, but it's not very interesting. And it certainly doesn't make for a good story. So really what we're actually talking about with mechanics is something like power plus engaging options plus unique abilities. A 1 in mechanics represents only a basic attack. Examples of this would be a bandit, a skeleton, or a camel. A 2 in mechanics represents a small number of limited abilities, like a troglodyte, minotaur, or crocodile. A 3 in mechanics is a few interesting choices, moderately tactical in its potential, things like Otyu, vampire spawn, or a spy. 4 is it has many options, very unique abilities, or major disruption of enemy expectations, such as Pit Fiend, a satyr with pipes, or a deva. And the top, getting a 5 in mechanics, represents diverse options or astonishing abilities. It's an immensely fun creature. Think of a beholder, a genie, or an arcanoloth. Next is style, which takes into account both appearance and demeanor. So as we look at an entry's artwork and read its description, we get a feel for its aesthetics and tone. Now, of course, personal preferences and biases will come into play here, to some extent at least, but I do try to be balanced in my approach. Let's look at some examples. A 1 in style is a creature that is annoying, ridiculous, or it disrupts your immersion in the game. Examples of this would be the GIF and the flumph. And note there are very, very few entries that I actually give a 1 in style. A 2 in style would be something that's just too plain, or maybe it's lacking. Examples are bandit, guard, and ultraloth. There also are not a lot of entries with a 2 in style. 3 is just cool and effective, straight up. A wolf, zombie, or a goblin. 4 is something that's very cool or uniquely inspiring. A werewolf, nightmare, or chul. A 5 is something that is amazing, terrifying, or gorgeous. Think of an aboleth, a lich, or a night hag. It is said that 5th edition is composed of 3 main pillars: combat, exploration, and social interaction. The role-playing attribute is all about the interaction portion there. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I have to repeat myself because this is one of the most misunderstood parts of my ranking videos. I'm not talking about your ability or the DM's ability to roleplay here. This is not a discussion of your own creative skill and how you breathe life into a monster or a class. This is an examination of the entries themselves, what is actually part of the creature or the class that relates to social interaction in the fantasy world. A 1 in role-playing does not interact. A zombie, a lemure, a gelatinous cube. 2 interacts in very limited ways, a ghoul, a bearded devil, or ogre. 3 has a moderate level of social play, things like a kobold, a beholder, a druid. 4 is something that's very social and very involved, a quotoa, mind flayer, or drow. And a 5 is an entry that is completely centered around very meaningful or at least very impactful interactions. An imp, a succubus, a vampire. All of the attributes are very important, but lore is one so dear to my heart, as it is actually the foundation of everything we're doing with role-playing games. In my very first ranking video, Beastfolk, I called this attribute Myth, and I connected it to mythology and legends and folklore. But I soon realized that it needed to be even broader, so I changed it quickly to lore in order to be more encompassing, even though in the end, if a game designer or you yourself create new lore, you're essentially creating new mythology. Semantics aside, this is the reason why we play RPGs, and most games for that matter. We love stories, we love being part of stories. Without the story, we have no soul, and we are left with bare functions and mechanical operation. A 1 in the lore attribute is something that's very basic or even non-existent lore. A badger, a thug. There are very, very few entries with a 1 in lore. A 2 in lore is something that's general or generic. 3 Kreen, Gibbering Mouther, Cambion. A 3 gives us some interesting lore, but it's sometimes vague or underdeveloped. A Naga, a Wight, a Rakshasa. A 4 gives us compelling backgrounds and histories and unique story hooks that we have the option to follow. Quotoa, Aboleth, Mummy Lord. A 5 has deep and immensely inspiring lore, or it's something that's steeped in the pursuit of lore. Think of a mind flayer, a ghost, or a night hag. Last but not least is the versatility attribute. As you can imagine, it has everything to do with the flexibility of a monster or class. And I do mean versatility in all respects, from combat rules, to its goals in the world, to the ability to express itself in various ways. Sometimes we come across a creature that has very low versatility, but it's otherwise quite effective and has a distinct flavor. What happens in these cases is that the creature has a very limited place in the D&D world, and its design space is small, so it's relegated to just one tiny niche. On the flip side, a higher versatility creature can appear over and over in many different manners, continually finding new ways to be a part of the experience. A creature with a 1 in versatility simply always does the same thing over and over. A wraith, a gibbering mouther, a giant spider. 2 gives us a one-track behavior with deviations in certain circumstances. A berserker, an orc, a grell. A 3 is moderately versatile. It can fill a couple different roles, or maybe has multiple goals. Centaur, Swaggin, Arrhenius. 4 is very flexible. It's able to fill a few different roles very well, and it has diverse goals. A storm giant, a lizard folk, or an imp. And a 5 is virtually able to do anything, be anything, and create any kind of scenario. A Yuan-ti, cleric, an elf. And for that matter, all or probably most of the character races would have a 5 in versatility. Now that I've broken down how to rate the attributes of an entry, let's look at how I place them into tiers. To do so, I add up all the attribute scores and compare the total result to the following guidelines. Once you see an entry's total score and tier, you might have a sense that it's not quite right, so in that case, go back over it, examining each attribute in the stat block, the written description, etc. Let's do an example breakdown. I'll take a look at a monster I have yet to include in any ranking, and I'll rate its attributes and its tier. I've actually randomly came to the doppelganger. I think this is a great example here. Starting with the mechanics, we're reading the stat block from the top to the bottom. The AC and the hit points are on the low end for a CR3 monster, so I'm getting a mage sort of vibe from the start here. The speed is a normal 30 feet walking. It has expertise in deception, charm immunity, and dark vision. Nothing remarkable or strong yet. The shape change ability is interesting. Very interesting. The doppelganger can polymorph into small or medium humanoid that it has already seen, though it does not actually change any stats or give it any different abilities, so it's a pure cosmetic change. So there's a ton of potential here for interaction scenes and plots. Combat-wise, it could set up this unexpected encounter, but that's it, as it doesn't actually grant any further attacks or special abilities. It's not a wild shape or actual polymorph. Ambusher is decent for that scenario I mentioned when a doppelganger tricks someone into a surprise encounter through its disguise, but it's limited to just that. Surprise attack is similar to a 3d6 sneak attack, though it only functions during the first round of combat when the doppelganger has the target surprised. Unlike sneak attack, the doppelganger can deal this damage multiple times if it hits more than once, such as with these 2 slam attacks that I'm seeing here, so this ability is situationally powerful. Otherwise, the creature's slam attack really is not very strong. The read thoughts ability is also quite interesting. It gives the doppelganger freedom to read the surface thoughts of any creature within 60 feet, and it gains advantage on insight and deception checks against that creature. Much like with its shape change, this is a great ability for building story and weaving plots, and if needed, to set up a surprise attack with the characters caught off guard by the doppelganger pretending to be someone else. From a purely mechanics-based standpoint, the doppelganger is quite interesting. It has some unique abilities, they have a lot of creative potential, though beyond that first round surprise attack in an encounter, it's a fairly weak monster. It probably would just run away if it wants to survive. If it was me designing this creature, I would have made its standard attack a bit stronger, even bringing down the surprise attack damage a bit if needed to compensate for that. I also would have raised its AC a little bit to account for its low hit points and the fact that it's actually not a mage, it's a melee fighter. Possibly higher AC and more mobility, that would make it more of a skirmisher type. I also would give it slightly higher intelligence, that would account for some better strategizing and a better ability at convincingly portraying a smarter creature, like a court advisor or a wizard. I'm torn between giving it a 3 or a 4 in mechanics. So for now, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and do that 4. We'll come back to that later on. So I'm referencing the verbiage here, very unique abilities or major disruption of enemy expectations. In terms of style, the doppelganger's true form is quite plain. It can of course take on any humanoid appearance and adopt all kind of mannerisms, which is pretty damn cool when you think about it. Its tone is that of a secretive manipulator, a trickster, also a hedonist. I'm going to give it a 4 in style. Very cool, uniquely inspiring. Role-playing is this creature's strongest suit, as I expected from the get-go, so I give it a max rating of 5. It is centered around meaningful interactions. The doppelganger is all about social interactions, both behind the scenes and center stage. On to lore. I immediately noticed that the entry has only a few very short paragraphs. A short write-up isn't necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, but you have to pack a real wallop in order to convey a potent and compelling lore in such a short space. In this entry's lore, we learn how the doppelgangers are conniving tricksters who love to undermine society. They are thieves of secrets, spies of their own design, and lazy, selfish hedonists who leave single mothers in their wake. I seriously question the doppelganger's neutral alignment. Seems more like chaotic neutral, neutral evil, even chaotic evil. Overall, the lore is decent. Nothing really grabs me, but it's certainly enough to work with. I give it a 3. Interesting lore, sometimes vague or underdeveloped. And at last we come to versatility, which should be high, right? Let's take a look at the guidelines. Well, it's definitely not a 1. It's not a 2. But I also don't think it's a 5. As much as the doppelganger would love this rating, it really can't do or be anything, as its shape change is only cosmetic. Role-playing wise, this is extremely flexible. But beyond this, it's just an underpowered melee puncher that's quickly going to die after its initial surprise attack. Is this entry intended to just be a baseline doppelganger and then we add classes on top of it? If so, then why are there no further entries in any of the other bestiary books? There's not any sections in the books that talk about this, nor does the doppelganger's lore mention any such potential. So I'm just going to have to assume that a doppelganger could become any class. I'm thinking particularly ones like rogue, bard, sorcerer, but that's going to be exclusively the domain of a DM creating something. It's not in the actual monster entry. So again, I'm torn between 3 and 4. I'm going to go with 3 for now. The doppelganger is so versatile in interaction scenes, but in combat and otherwise, not really at all. So, let's look at the total score now. With a total score of 19, the doppelganger would land at the bottom of A tier. Does that sound right to you? If we took its versatility up a notch, it would still basically be low A tier. However, if we took its mechanics down a notch, it would be high B tier. What does your gut tell you? My gut is telling me that this doppelganger entry in the monster manual is not A tier material. Not quite. It's really good in some ways, but notably limited or underdeveloped in others. So here's my revision. The doppelganger is a great B-tier monster with a lot to offer for those who are willing to utilize its strong points. With a bit more development, a couple more entries showing us doppelgangers with class-like abilities, it could easily hit A tier. Again, this is not an exact science. Personal preferences are going to factor into this. And really, this is a great thing because in a game like D&D, we make it our own as opposed to, say, a video game, which is constricted by hard rules. Here we get to share in the role of creator. I will admit that I've been slightly off in some of my rankings, perhaps a bit too harsh when it comes to versatility or style. But in most cases, if I were to revise an entry's ranking, they're typically only off by like 1 point, so it's usually not worth fussing about. Thank you, as always, for watching. I've got some links down in the video description if you're interested in other D&D and fantasy-related things that I do. I've got a ton more ideas and projects to come, so you have my gratitude for being along with me on these delves, and may your adventures be many.